All right, so how's everybody doing today? Can everyone hear me just fine? I mean, everyone's on mute now, so. Okay, great. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Marty. I'm the new hospitality and events coordinator here at Stoke. Oh, I see the chat. Thank you, everybody. So thank you for attending our panel today. I think it'll be really helpful, especially with everything going on with coronavirus. So today we're going to be talking about how you can best financially prepare your small business in light of everything going on, and how you can take care of yourself and your employees in light of everything. So joining us today, we have Penny Miller, who is the president of my HR department. We have Marty Rivers, the Denton Market President of American National Bank and Trust. And then finally, we have Russell Wallace, who did just join us. Hi, Russell.
Hey.
Who is a CPA at Wallace Accounting Advisory. So thank you guys for joining us today. We appreciate y'all's presence and helpful tips and everything. So I'll finish up my spiel so we can get started. But basically, we want this panel to be interactive. So if you guys have any questions, while the speakers are giving their presentations, you can enter it into the chat box if you want me to ask the question at the end of the presentation, or feel free to jump in and ask the question yourself during the Q&A session. So let's start off with some introductions. Penny, if you want to go first, I would just like to hear you introduce yourself and briefly cover what you'll be talking about today.
Okay, well, I'm Penny and I own my HR department, which is an independent HR consulting and outsourcing company. And I work with primarily small employers. One of the things I'm going to be doing today is to talk about some of the new legislation and regulations that have come out that affect small businesses, primarily the Coronavirus Response Act. So that'll be what I'll do.
Awesome. All right, Marty, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Marty Rivers. Been in Denton banking for about 25 years, and my goal today is just maybe talk you through if you're having some difficult times, what kind of conversations you might want to have or can have with your banker, what options they may have, and then also just kind of give you a summary of the CARE bill that was, I guess, just passed by the House here a few minutes ago, and what options you have there, and what are some of the nuts and bolts of how to get some funding through the SBA.
That sounds great. All right, and then Russell, if you want to finish up.
Yeah, so I'm a CPA here in Denton. Been a CPA for a dozen or so years. You'll have to excuse the relaxed polo and no hair done. I, in fact, just shaved off my Corona beard just now for this meeting here. But so totally embracing the work from home culture right now, but trying to stay up on all the laws and stuff, and so happy to help where I can.
Awesome. And we are recording this, Janis, so we'll make sure to release that to everybody and to the public once we're done today. All right, so if you guys want to begin presentations, Penny, do you want to start us off?
Sure.
Awesome.
Obviously, we don't have a lot of time today, so I'm just going to hit the high points. I do want to make sure that everybody realizes that the situation is very fluid, and there are a lot of questions we just don't have the answers to at this point, that we're still waiting for information from the Department of Labor. But what I'm telling you is current as of this morning, and I did provide the resource to the chamber so that you can get that if you get behind on taking notes. So let's talk a little bit about three things. One is unemployment insurance for your employees. The second is the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. And then the last are just to highlight a few other things you might want to do a little research on as you try to make decisions. But in the 10-15 minutes we have, I'm just not going to be able to go into a lot of detail. Probably the easiest thing to talk about right now is the unemployment insurance. Texas Workforce Commission did make some changes to unemployment here just last week. One, there is no waiting period for your employees to be able to collect benefits. So as soon as they file, they'll become eligible. And they've also eliminated the requirement to be actively searching for work, since we're trying to keep everybody in the house. So those are probably the two things. So be sure to give your employees information if you reduce their hours, or if you do have to lay off, or if you furlough, so that they can file and get started collecting as soon as they can. The more complicated thing is the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, because it does levy some requirements on employers. It applies to employers who have fewer than 500 employees, which is very close to 100% of all employers in the United States. So it applies to pretty much everyone. Healthcare employers and emergency responders can be excluded, although there has not yet been any guidance on exactly how to do that, but there is an option for non-participation to some parts of that act. It is effective April the 1st, and it will be through December 31st. Two things in here that are very important. One is the requirement to provide paid sick leave, and the second is an expansion of the Family Medical Leave Act. There is also a new poster that I'm getting ready to send the link out on now that does need to be posted or mailed to your employees or emailed to your employees, some way so they know what their rights are under the act. So let's start with the paid sick leave. It does require you to pay up to 80 hours of emergency paid sick leave to full-time employees, and a prorated portion of that to your part-time employees. There is some information about exactly how to calculate part-time. I'm not going to go into that, but there is a proration. It is to be paid if they're home sick from the coronavirus, for the diagnosis of a coronavirus, taking care of somebody with the coronavirus, or complying with a quarantine order. It also, if they've, applies to people who are staying home because schools are closed or daycare centers are closed. The federal government will provide a refund on your payroll tax. So you are going to pay it up front, and then you can apply for a credit when you file your payroll taxes in order to be able to recoup that money. It pays before any other sick, vacation, or PTO time. So if you already have sick leave or PTO available to your employees, this pays first, and then it would go to your sick leave or PTO program. Employees are covered as soon as they are hired, so there is no waiting period in order for them to be able to access this benefit. Probably the thing that will be a little bit more concerning to some of you perhaps is the expansion of the Family Medical Leave Act, because many of you have not had to worry about FMLA before because it required 50 or more employees within 75 miles. But this now covers any employer with fewer than 500 employees. So it provides for the opportunity for 12 weeks of additional leave. In this case, it's paid leave. So the first 10 days is unpaid, but that's covered under the previous information for the sick leave. And then the final 10 weeks, there is a way to calculate the amount of pay that the individual would get, which is roughly 2/3 of what they would normally make. Now, again, you pay and then you file for a credit against your payroll taxes in order to recoup that money. It does provide that employers with less than 25 employees do not have to provide guaranteed reemployment as you would under the Family Medical Leave. And it also reduces the amount of time and the number of hours worked for employees to be eligible. So if you're familiar with FMLA, normally you have to work for the employer for 12 months and you have to have worked 1,250 hours. In this particular case, you only have to work for the employer for 30 days. So as soon as your employee reaches 30 days of employment, then they are eligible to take this leave. The documentation, although the compliance documents aren't out, are relatively straightforward because they don't want you having to go through the medical certification process. And so it doesn't take much to qualify for this. But we don't have the compliance regulations yet, so I can't tell you exactly what you have to have at the present time. There is a provision under both the paid sick leave and the Family Medical Leave expansion that employers with fewer than 50 employees may be able to be exempted from the requirements if such requirements would jeopardize the viability of the business as a going concern. And so the interpretation that so far has been put on that is if the employer will go bankrupt as a consequence. That has not been spelled out, but that's what pretty much every employment lawyer that has put out anything has indicated they believe is the intent. Again, we're waiting on information from the Department of Labor that says exactly what it is you have to provide or what you have to have. So those are probably the two biggest things that are going to be frustrating for many employers. Some other things you need to think about is, one, the Fair Labor Standards Act, wage and hour still applies. There have been no changes to wage and hour. I've had some employers call me trying to do some kind of hinky things in order to get through this, but none of those rules have been relaxed. You cannot require doctor's notes for absences, again, because they're trying to keep the stress off the healthcare system. Most of the people that are going to a doctor, if the doctor feels like they could have coronavirus, are giving them a letter that says self-quarantine. And so you just have to assume that 14 days is a given there. If you're doing furloughs or layoffs, just be careful with that. I've already had calls from a few employers that are kind of targeting certain people. All those anti-discrimination statutes still apply, so you do need to be careful. But yes, that is an option that you do have. There are some tricky things in terms of benefits, both your health benefits and your 401k, that can come back and bite you. And so if you want to make changes to your health plan or your 401k or some other benefits, you still got to be sure you don't get contrary with ERISA. So for example, some insurance companies, for all the best reasons in the world, are calling this a special enrollment event for their employees to be able to gain access to the health plan. That is not in compliance with ERISA. I'm not saying that might not change, but at the moment you risk disqualifying your plan for tax purposes. And so just kind of keep up on that and try to make sure that you get that right. And then E-Verify. Those of you who use E-Verify, E-Verify has issued an extension to take care of those Social Security conflict type cases that you have. You still have to initiate them within 3 days, but since the Social Security offices are closed to the public, they have extended the amount of time to be able to finish those cases, and no adverse actions can be taken against employees because they cannot get the appropriate documentation in time. They have issued instructions on exactly how to document the reason for this. So just be sure that if you are an E-Verify employer, that you look that up. And I know that's a whole lot of information really, really fast. So, you know, if you have any problems, anything comes up that you want to talk about, you're welcome to call me. My number is 940-867-9761. And I'll be happy to set up an appointment over Zoom, or we can talk by email in order to get you the information you need.
Perfect. Thank you, Penny. So we do have a few questions. So Jeff asked to please touch on self-employed, I guess what their options are.
If you are self-employed, you can actually fall under these statutes. You know, I'm self-employed, but so far I've been in pretty good shape. I've been pretty busy, but there are mechanisms under unemployment as well as the sick leave program to be able to initiate that, to be able to get paid. So I'm sure other people will be able to talk to that a little bit too.
Great. Okay. And then we also have a question about the sick pay. Is it for waged or salaried workers only? Both? Okay.
Both.
Great. All right. And then we have a question from Aaron. How would this apply for 1,099 contractors?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. Okay.
That's right. You're a contractor. Sorry.
All righty. And then the last question is also from Jeff. Says his wife has a leased hair salon that is closed down. So not only has she lost the income, but the salon is still wanting the lease for the chair. They'd like to know what their options are for this.
Well, there is nothing that says that the hair salon can't call for that money. They may want to sit down with them and try to work some kind of an arrangement to be able to maybe pay a portion of it, or perhaps pay it when they get back to work. But there is nothing, I mean, if they have that contract's still in force. There has been nothing to overcome that.
All right. Well, does anyone else have any questions for Penny at this time? No? All right. So thank you, Penny.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Penny,
go ahead.
I actually have a question for you. Something that has come up with some of my clients here is that, what about the, you know, they're trying to retain as many employees as possible, but there's some that they cannot. And so they've actually furloughed them. And some of those employees have come back and said, hey, can you pay me for the 2 weeks of due to being home due to the coronavirus, the paid sick leave? Are they in? I know that that law was backdated to January 1st as far as a measurement period for, you know, businesses qualifying for a tax credit if they had to pay somebody. But are they mandated to have to pay them? This is all new territory for a lot of these people because they're under, you know, they're not under the normal FMLA type of and OSHA rules.
The question and answers that were put out by Department of Labor this week indicated that the law goes into effect on April 1st. The employer is not required to pay for any time prior to April the 1st. So if they have furloughed people, and if they furlough people for lack of work, this paid leave would not apply anyway. It's only for if they're sick, quarantined, their family member's sick, that's what it's for. It's a sick leave, not any other type of leave. So no, they do not have to pay them. The person can file for unemployment though.
Sure. Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, and then we have one more question. How can we get the poster mentioned with this info on it? You could send that to Stoke and we can publicly put it out to everybody.
I'll send you the link.
Yeah. And then looks like one more question from Lisa. Could you speak to the fine print on the forgivable loans for employee compensation? Is that for February 1st through June 30th, or do those loans come through the SBA?
I think that's probably better a Marty question or a Russell question than it is me.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you, Penny. All right, Marty, you're up.
All right, thank you. If it's okay, I may try to help answer Jeff's questions about his lease. I'm going to talk in pretty general terms. Just every landlord has got a different situation. So if you're leasing space or a house, if you're leasing space, you do have a contract that requires you to make a payment. Not all our landlords are Donald Trump type people. Some of those people need that lease to buy food and make their mortgage payment, and some don't. And so depending on those circumstances, the conversations with your landlord and the tenant are going to be very specific to everybody's situation. So my advice is work with your landlord. Most landlords, I'll say most, don't want to kick out any tenants. Banks don't want to foreclose on anybody and do that, but they would rather keep everybody there, and most people are willing to work on that. So if there's a way you can do partial payments or work out some kind of an arrangement, maybe extend the lease, just kind of have those conversations. The best thing you can do, and my number one advice for anybody in business right now, is to talk to their landlords and or their banks and try to work something out. Not always easy, but SBA has come up with some options that may maybe help you with that. What I wanted to start off with is communicating with your banker. And if you are having some hard times and you've either lost income, had to close your business and lay off employees, or whatever your situation is, first thing to do is call your banker as soon as possible and tell them what's going on and see if there's a way for them to help. I can't stress enough, the best thing you can do is talk to your banker. The folks that just don't pay their loan payment or cut off all kind of communications, the bankers really don't want to work with you. That's what's going to be. Most bankers want to try to work something out. Our bank regulators have given us some slack on the ability to work with our borrowers, or we can defer loan payments or do some interest-only payments. And so there are some options there that is making it easy for us as bankers to work with you. If you do call I'm going to say landlord or your banker, be prepared to answer some questions. And the first question is, are you experiencing problems directly because of the COVID-19 crisis? What kind of cash flow do you have? Or have you laid employees off? Do you have savings? Do you have other sources of income? What can I do to maybe keep you in compliance with your lease or your loan payment? If I have customers that have rental property and they call and ask me, can I not make my payment? I'm going to ask them, have they asked those questions? And so that's a normal thing. And the answer may be no to all those things. They don't have the other sources, and that just helps you determine where to go with the rest of the conversation. When you're talking to your banker, you know, depending on whether you're a current customer or you're calling up a banker that maybe somebody referred to you, they're going to, you know, maybe you have a line of credit already. Do you have some unfunded funds in that? Is there a way to increase that? Is there a way to provide more collateral to help me do something like that? Can I defer my payments or make some interest-only payments for the next 2 or 3 months or 6 months, depending on those circumstances? And I can't stress enough, each small business is different and all the circumstances are different. And while banks are banks, each one has a little bit different specialty and where they work. And if you're dealing with local banks here in our community, local bankers like myself, we all have to go to the grocery store and see you. And so we're really willing to try to work something out the best we can. I will say, if you have a history of not paying your loan on time, or you're already past due before all this stuff happened, that's going to be kind of a different conversation. So every circumstance is different, but we do want to work with you, and we need you to communicate with us so we can try to help. So in the last, I guess the last few days, Congress, even the last couple of weeks, has passed a bill, the CARE Act, that has some information in there about how the SBA and banks can help you maybe get through this crisis. And the House passed that this morning. I guess it has to go to the president, and I'm going to say there's a lot of information. I'm getting the information from all kinds of sources, even directly from the SBA, and so I'm going to try to summarize it the best I can. The first one is there's a SBA economic injury disaster loan out there, and that's if your state of Texas has declared a disaster, so that puts us our small businesses available to apply for those. That loan, you actually apply directly with the SBA instead of going to a bank, and you go to the SBA website. I've been there. I will tell you, it's overloaded with people trying to go to the SBA website. Their recommendation is to try to go there during non-peak hours. So if you can get on in the middle of the night and start the loan process, that's the best time to do that. They have loans that are available for up to 30 years at 3.75% fixed. Those terms are kind of based on each individual circumstances. And you have to prove that there's been a financial injury due to the coronavirus. And they have a formula, which I do not know, that they use to determine what your loan amount would be. They recently just made it where the loans can be based solely on credit scores. So if you have a good credit score, you'll be eligible for that. If not, it's going to be tougher. Loans less than $200,000 will not require a personal guarantee. I'm going to say can be approved without a guarantee. That doesn't mean they won't. And if it's less than $25,000, then there may be no collateral requirement. So they have really relaxed the rules for the economic injury disaster type loans to make it easier for folks to get there and get it faster. If that's something that you think you can qualify for, there's some information on the SBA website about that. My suggestion is get online and apply for it as soon as possible, because there's probably millions of other people in the United States doing the same thing right now. The SBA doesn't have the staff to handle all that. That's partly why they've made it easier to get this through. They want to be able to help as fast as they can. As fast as they can may also mean a month or several weeks to get through the process. So that's going to be kind of an overriding theme. The other program that they just passed today as well is called the Paycheck Protection Program. And instead of applying directly with the SBA, you apply with a bank, and that is normally how the SBA loans work. You apply with a bank or an SBA loan packager, or there are even non-bank lenders that specialize in SBA loans, and then the government guarantees those loans. And so normally, just in a nutshell, those guarantees are 75%, but they have made those 100%. So you can go to your bank, apply for one of these loans, and the government's going to guarantee it at 100% in an effort to help induce us to make those loans during these times. You have to have a business that has less than 500 employees. There are some different circumstances depending on the type of business, but generally less than 500 employees. That includes sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed people. It even includes nonprofits. So any of you out there that are involved in a nonprofit, it includes some of them. That may be an option for them. I know they're struggling as well. The maximum loan amount, you'll see the theme here, it's all tied to your payroll. The maximum loan amount is 250% of your average monthly payroll. So whatever that number is, multiply that times 2.5%, 2.5 times, and that's the maximum amount you could get. And that has to exclude anybody that is making over $100,000 a year. And the maximum loan amount is also $10 million. One of the neat things that the SBA has done is waived the so-called no credit elsewhere clause. A lot of times in these kind of circumstances, you have to prove that you have gone to a bank and can't get a loan without SBA guarantee. They have waived that to make it easier. The requirements for the loan, and again, I'm summarizing, there's a lot of detail to this, but the employer that's applying for a loan has to certify that the loan proceeds will be used to retain workers, maintain your payroll. You can use this to make your mortgage and or lease payments, pay your utilities, and your health care and insurance costs. You had to have been in operation as of February 15th, and they're going to go by the employees that you had and contractors on the payroll at that time. I am not sure. I've reached out. I haven't got an answer yet. If you were in business at that time, but since that time maybe you have furloughed or moved somebody to hourly or laid anybody off, does that still count as keeping your payroll if you apply for the loan, and if you get the loan proceeds, are able to put those people all back on full time? I think what they have done, if I'm interpreting it correctly, is as long as you were in business and had those people February 15th, then that will count and you can get back to work. The really other awesome part about this is they will forgive your loan if you meet certain criteria, and pretty much you have to maintain the amount of payroll that you had when you applied for the loan. So if you get the loan proceeds and you get back in business and are able to keep your employees, then that loan will get forgiven as long as you meet those terms. So it's really a grant that you don't have to pay back. If for some reason you have to reduce your payroll, then you pay pretty much the difference in what that percentage is. To also help you with that, they're going to defer those payments, those loan payments, 6 to 12 months, and let you just pay that difference. And I think it's up to 10 years, and the maximum rate right now is right at 4%. There's a couple other opportunities out there. TWU just announced a Assist Her Emergency Leave Grant program through their, I guess, the Entrepreneurial Center for Women. They have 100 $10,000 grants, so $1 million in grants to women-owned business statewide. You have to prove that you have a hardship due to COVID-19. You have to be current on your property and payroll taxes and those kind of things. So if you need some information on that option, you can just go to the TWU website, probably twu.edu, and find that information. And then I would also say you could look at the Chamber of Commerce website. We've got a lot of good resources there for you to take a look at and some help. That's a lot of stuff in about 10 minutes.
Definitely. We do have 2 questions for you. So from Joy, she says that she applied for a loan through the SBA, and she's wondering how long will it take to hear from them?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I don't think anybody does. I was on a conference call this morning with our county economic development director and our city staff and the chamber, and one of the SBA representatives was on there, and he said 4 to 5 weeks. But the downside to all this stuff is that the SBA is not equipped to handle all this all at once. The bill that passed today gives the SBA 15 days to come up with how they're going to administer this program. They're going to try to streamline the approval process. So if you just think about how they get started, they've got to come up with a new application. So if as soon as the president signs this and the SBA is on the clock, I'm sure they're already working on it. They have 15 days just to get the program in place. Then I think it's going to take, he said 4 to 5 weeks, and there's no telling how long that'll take. I know everybody's in a hurry. There is some funds built into that. I think it's $10,000 in emergency funds that you can get ahead of time to maybe wait until you get your application in process. That also might be a good time to talk to your banker if you've applied and you've been approved and you're waiting to see how you can get the funds. Maybe there's something they can do in the short term.
Okay, thank you. We have a few more questions. So from Heather, she says, is it true that those payments for the disaster relief loan are deferred for a year after the loan is issued?
Yes, I think it is, Heather.
Okay. Alrighty, and then from Martha, we have, does the bank have to be an SBA partner bank? Not sure if this is the right terminology for the payroll loans.
The answer is yes, but they are, so sidetrack here, some banks specialize in SBA loans. Some banks have approval to do them and don't really do a lot of them, but can do them. And then some banks just don't do them. You have to get approved with the SBA to be able to do SBA loans. With this CARE Act, they are going to make it easier for those banks that do not normally do SBA loans to be able to handle these types of loans. With that being said, if you're a bank that never does SBA loans, this may be a little bit overwhelming for you as well. There are some, you can go on the internet and look up SBA loans, and you can see a lot of like the top 10 or 20 banks that do SBA loans across the country. Most of the really large national banks do SBA loans. There's some non-bank lenders out there. Newtek is one of them that comes to my mind, or Live Oak Bank is a very well-known SBA specialty bank. You can look at the Chamber of Commerce website and see the people who do those will tell you who kind of does SBA loans.
All right, and then another question, on the forgivable loans you just described, is that for payroll from February 1st to June 30th, or March 1st through June 30th, or some other set of dates? Is there written information on these loans that I can read somewhere?
Well, I don't want to tell you wrong. I want to say it's the cost I have written down here from February 15th through June 30th. Again, I think there was a little bit of language that was changed today. I'm sure I can speak for everybody who's on the panel. This stuff has come at us in fire hoses. It's coming at us from every kind of organization you can think of, our national congressmen, our accountants and CPAs, and our friends that are trying to help out, sending us all kinds of information. And so it's hard to keep up with. And so it should become more available. We'll try to get that stuff out there on the chamber website as well. SBA will have this information. I actually had an email this morning for about 9 o'clock this morning from the SBA because it hadn't passed. They don't have it until it's passed. They don't have the directive. And so this is just so fresh. The conversations I'm having with my customers today are completely different than they were a week ago, and especially different than they were 2 weeks ago. So you can imagine, just like in your businesses, things are happening fast, and we're just trying to keep up as much as you are.
Definitely. All right, so we're a little close on time, so I'm going to let Russell go ahead and get started, and we can wrap up with any questions that we may have missed at the end if we have enough time. If not, we can connect you guys to the right people to ask your questions. All right, so Russell, if you want to take the lead.
Yeah, so Marty and Penny have covered a good chunk of this. One note, we know that the tax deadline, if you owe, has been extended to July 15th, as well as having to file to July 15th. But some, as these laws sometimes don't make a lot of sense, if you plan to file after July 15th, you still need to go ahead and put an extension. So that's the guidance that we're getting right now, is that if you're going to file past July 15th, you still have to extend by April 15th. So if you think that's possible, you might want to call your CPA or jump online real quick and get an extension filed for that. The other thing I wanted to be sure and touch on here was most of the laws here have been covered, but I wrote down a couple of questions as they were kind of being asked. And to clarify, on the unemployed options, the unemployment, if you are a 1099 worker or something like that, then that unemployment insurance has been extended to you. What I've read so far, and this is like an hour ago, was that to prove that out, they're going to look at your 2019 tax returns or your 1099s received from Uber or other kind of gig economy related businesses. Then the on the salon lease, one thing I wanted to make sure and mention, I've been working with some clients of mine trying to defer some lease payments, but they you want to be sure and keep paying that because you have a contract with them, and then there are penalties if you break that contract. So definitely talk to them and try to get some forgiveness or some help there. But whatever you do, if you can possibly keep paying them, you're going to want to, because there's usually there's some pretty stiff penalties built into those lease contracts. On the forgivable loans, one thing I didn't hear Marty mentioned that you have to be careful about is that so you can rehire your employees, but they're going to look at your employee count before and your employee before the coronavirus issues and your employee count during for those 8 weeks. And if you drop below, I believe it's the 25% mark, that's where you start to have the repayment options kick in based on what I was reading there as well. Most of the questions that I've coming from my clients are tailored around the extension of time to pay and file, which we covered there, is July 15th, which you still need to extend. And the other ones revolve around, so they've laid people off generally. I do a lot of healthcare work and a lot of non-essential and non-emergent healthcare work or businesses. And so they've had to stop seeing patients due to the lack of personal protective equipment. And so they've had to lay everyone off because they had to stop seeing patients as early as a week and a half ago, and the governor put up an order here on Sunday. So one of the problems that one of the issues that we've been looking into for them is if you've already laid staff off, then what do you do, right? And so so that's what I asked Penny that question, and that confirms kind of what I've been reading too, is that you can you don't have to pay those staff if you can't afford it, but also under the forgivable loans, if you get the loan and you bring them back, they still qualify, so you're not exempted from that. All of these provisions, if you are an S corp filer and you pay yourself payroll, you still qualify. You've paid unemployment insurance, so you still qualify for unemployment insurance, and you still qualify for the SBA notes that Marty was mentioning there too. So I guess we'll leave a little extra time here. Again, Marty and Penny kind of talked about a lot of the things that I had written down. So if anybody has any questions, we'll leave some extra time for that.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess Penny, Marty, Russell, any of you guys can answer any questions that may come up since they're not specific to this section. We do have a question from Kenny. He says, my first business opened February 29th. I have one employee, no loans or investors, rent of $3,500 per month, and a lot of what we're talking about is still Greek to me. I need an SBA loan, but it might be based on a business plan or / future projections. Should I still apply normally on the SBI website, or should I consult with someone?
So that's probably a really long question to answer for the group. Mostly when you do an SBA loan, you go to a bank and apply, and they do the loan and they work with the SBA behind the scenes, or you can go to a packager. So I would just say you probably need to apply for a new loan. Be prepared for it to be really busy because everybody's busy with this as well. Be happy to talk to you offline here and maybe offer some suggestions and tell you a little bit more about what that process would be like.
Great. And then we have another question from Ken. We're also filing a business interruption claim with our insurance company. Will this interfere or potentially overlap with any / all loan possibilities?
Ken, I don't think so. Matter of fact, I can't remember if I said it or not, but I had on here, one of the things to do is to talk to your insurance agent, and if you have business interruption insurance, go ahead and file a claim. Everybody's telling me that pandemic viruses are not covered, but your local insurance agents can't help you unless you go out there and file that. So they're usually pretty good to work with, and I'm sure that's happening all over the place. I don't think that would interfere with any of that. Again, the devils are in the details with the SBA stuff until we get everything out there, but I can't imagine they wouldn't want you to do that. Also, if you apply for either one of these SBA loans and you get accepted, you don't have to take the money. I think you may be able to do both, but if you were approved for both of them, you may decide one's a better deal than the other one. So it probably doesn't hurt to go ahead and apply for both.
So maybe that applies to the next question. So Heather is asking, there seem to be many options for SBA loans, disaster forgiveness, etc. Are there limits to how many of these resources a business can access?
I'm trying not to hog the conversation.
Anyone can jump in.
I was just going to say that I've read that you could only have one. You could only access one of these SBA notes. If you already have an existing SBA note that doesn't disqualify you, but you can only have one of the additional ones. But what Marty is saying is probably correct in that if you're approved for both, then you could take whichever one is the better deal, and the one that's going to be forgiven is probably a really good deal. I mean, this is 250% of your payroll. I think to qualify, you have to have at least a 10% drop in top line revenue that you can show. But again, I think this is also something that the banks are really giving a lot of leeway to approve on their own or not. And so if you have 250% of your payroll, then you pay your employees for 8 weeks, then there's still 50% of that left that you can use to pay rent and other bills and things like that. And then the loan is completely forgiven. So I've been telling all of my clients that as soon as the banks get their guidelines written out, that everyone should apply. in my world, everyone has been affected. And so I'm saying that everyone should apply. So I think that there's going to be a pretty big run on the bank. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that our clients are first in line.
Awesome. And we have another question. So does anyone have feedback on where to find written documentation on the forgivable payroll loan info discussed a few minutes ago?
So the summaries that I'm talking about, I guess we're all talking about, are in the CARE Act. So we're getting that information delivered to us directly from legislation. And technically, even though it's been passed by the Senate and the House, the president still has to sign it. And so once that happens, it'll be disseminated out to all the banks. I'm getting summaries from some trade groups for the general public. I think it'll just give us 24 hours and that news and that information will be out for everybody.
Great.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share, and Marty, I'm happy to share a PDF document with you that it's something I've kind of put together from a couple of different banks that seems to cover all the possible scenarios. It's a little lengthy, but it's good information. So I'll share that with you and Lacey, and if y'all can send out.
Yeah, and for that goes for all three of you. If there's any documentation, I know Penny's already mentioned that she's going to send something over, but any documentation that you think would be helpful, just send it over and we'll make sure to share it. We do have a couple more questions. So let's see. If you're an owner of a service-based business, have 7 employees, but you're not one of them, would we get a payout too with the SBA grant?
I would think that it would not cover distributions.
Oh, and then he says
so
outside of the
you're
payroll.
Getting paid by distributions there, KPC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he also says outside of the payroll for employees.
See, I'm assuming that you're. So you're probably not getting. You're probably getting paid through distributions, and I would doubt that would qualify for the SBA funds. But one thing you could do is you could still file for unemployment insurance. As long as you're able to show that you're not able to work because of the coronavirus issues. So even being a self-employed individual, I think through tax returns is probably how they'll notate that.
Great. Okay. And then has there been any info on extending these relief options if this pandemic continues further into 2020? Most of these options will only last small businesses a month or two.
Yeah, the point is, I think, 8 weeks. And so the goal is to get it through. I think you have to guarantee that your employees will be paid for 8 weeks for the forgivable loan. Is that right, Marty?
Yeah, I was going to say, just to answer the question, this is all happening in real time. And if this thing if this lasts 6 months or a year, I think we may be having another one of these webinars.
Probably.
The current bills do sunset at December 31st, 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, that's reminded me, you don't have to apply right now. I think you have a month or two that you can apply after the fact. So if something happens down the road, you're okay right now. You've got through the end of the year to do that.
All right, great. Well, that's all of the questions for now. Does anyone else have any questions about anything? You can unmute
Heather
yourself
had one
as
more,
well.
and Heather had one more question here about is this a disaster relief loan or not?
Yes.
There's two SBA programs. One that Marty talked about was you applied directly through the SBA. So that's the SBA, that's the disaster relief program. And the other one you apply through directly through people like Marty. So the one that's 250% of payroll and it's forgivable and all that, that's the one that you would apply directly through Marty. And so, or folks, in similar positions.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. And thank you everybody for attending. I hope this answered some of your questions. And if you have questions down the line, we'll make sure to have all the resources available so you can ask the right people. Anyone else have anything? Any ending notes?
I would just say I'm happy to talk to anybody. If you have any questions, see if I can help. And if I can't, I'll try to help you find somebody that can.
Awesome. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for coming, and thank you to our panelists for joining. We really appreciate it. I think you helped everybody out a lot. All right. So I guess we'll end the call here.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye, you guys.